Thank you. I'm not used to public speaking, so bear with me when I lose my train of thought. And at times, especially talking about photography and how I approach photography, it goes all over the place. I'm here and there, I'm everywhere. Kind of like that picture right there. I'm bouncing everywhere. I'm going from methodical to chaotic to what I see depending on my mood and depending on the time of day, the light of the day, whatever it is. It's pretty unpredictable. Klaus mentioned I'm German. I'm a little bit older, so I did a 3-year apprenticeship to become a photographer craftswoman. Some Germans here may recognize the Gesellenbrief, which I probably hold. I understand nowadays to police a photographer in Germany, you don't need that anymore. So shame, shame, shame. But I'm coming from analog, and I find myself mostly still shooting just as I did with my analog camera. Never mind, I got a 5D, I got the 5D Mark II. Just now, this month, I acquired the XT2 by Fuji, which is a fabulous little toy. But mostly still, if I'm lazy, I use program auto. Depending on the subject, I use either aperture or shutter priority. And a lot of times I still go manual, and the only thing automatic I use will be the autofocus, which took me a long time to get used to coming from analog. A long time, because I had the AE1 from Canon, and that didn't have autofocus lenses. So I jumped from fully manual to digital and just figured out how to go Photoshop and noise. What do you mean add noise? Why would I want to add noise to my photos? So it's kind of like the film grain, but live and learn. Anyway, so that's me, traveling. I'm a trailing spouse, so to speak. My husband is foreign service, and while he was stationed unaccompanied in Pakistan, I started my own photography business in DC, doing real estate. It took off really, really well. I ended up very fortunately shooting mostly high-end in Capitol Hill, and that was a lot of fun. But all things come to an end. I decided I do like my husband, I do want to stay with him and live with him, so we went to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Never again. And then we went to Milan, which was, I'm homesick for Milan. We have one person from Milan here. I don't think he's as homesick for Milan as I am. I got my Duomo and I got my pepperoncino. It was very good. And it's supposed to bring me luck tonight, so I don't bore you to death. In Milan, I didn't have clients as I did in DC. In DC, I was busy. I developed sort of a tunnel vision doing all this interior work, interior architecture, whether it was for real estate or interior designers or for builders, developers. It's all kind of similar. You don't get to play much. The nice thing is the rooms do not talk back. And if I don't want this or that sitting in a certain place in a certain way, I just move it or have someone move it. Can't really do that with people, so I've been told. But yeah, so in Milan, I had nothing else to do but go out and shoot. Get to know the city, and shoot. Get to know the people, shoot. And I started to go back to my roots, to really what got me into photography is telling stories, trying to create an image that will generate an emotional response first. And to me, it's more important than the technical aspect. I've seen tons of pictures of people that are fabulous technicians. I mean, it's like tack sharp from front to end, and everything is properly lit and exposed, and I'm sitting there, wow, oh, really cool, but it doesn't do anything. It just sits there and looks pretty, but it doesn't give me a warm and fuzzy or a raw. So, but those are different aspects. I mean, everybody does it differently. I'm, well, chaotic, I guess. So, light. It took me a long time to try to figure out what I'm going to tell you about light. I mean, it's the single most important aspect of photography. Writing with light is literally what photography means. And it's also a really, really loaded word, because it's not just the physical aspect, it's also metaphysical. Lightness, darkness, those are moods as well. They're not just physical appearances, they're moods. And trying to combine that is really what I'm trying to do writing with light. And we have the different, I got my cheat sheet. We have different aspects, categories and characteristics of light. So we have natural light as a category, which is the sun. I'm also saying the moon and the stars, although I know, the moon and the stars only reflect the sun's light. I know that. It's still a light source, okay? Bear with me. And then we have artificial lights, that thing. Those strobes, flashes, you know. And then we have ambient light, and I'm using that as a category in itself because it has its very own challenges and solutions and fun aspects. And ambient light is just whatever natural light we have coming from wherever, and artificial light sources. And I'm going to try to show examples. And then we have directional light. We have the front light as such, side light as such, or from behind, if you were standing there. And then diffusion of light, hard light, soft light. Hard light is really a lot either in summer, at peak of the day, really, really harsh light with really strong shadows. It's at times hard to work with because you quickly have things blown out or too dark. It can be an element of design, of creating an image, of composition. If you look at some abstract paintings and really think about it, it's light and dark. It's harsh light. So you find that summer, midday a lot. And then it is also hard light when it's directional. It's creating the stark contrasts to work with. And then we have the soft light that you find in the shade or filtered through mesh or some kind of cloth art. Well, dust, pollution is a filter of light. Just look at pictures of New Delhi lately. Bangkok, Beijing. That diffused light, this soft light that, does anybody remember David Hamilton as photographer? This really soft, elitist kind of light it's kind of like that through the dust, and it's just very soft. It comes from that. And then the filtering through cloths, and hence we have in portrait photography, you were asking about it, the soft boxes, which provide, you can direct the soft box, but it provides a much softer light, which is really great to minimize wrinkles and pores. Really great portrait light. There's that, and then temperature light. Cold light coming from having the bluish hues and magenta hues in images coming from deep shadows. When you're in deep shadow or a heavily overcast sky, you'll also find it in snowy areas in the mountains. Dolomites, for example, we were snowshoeing, and it was a really bright sunny day, gorgeous, but the light was so cold. Never mind, we were sweating because we were snowshoeing. Not going to do that again. And then there's, talking about cool light, the blue hour. Anybody know about the blue hour? Know what it is? When it is? Everyone? Well, that depends, in the morning or in the evening. It can be before or after. So the blue hour is usually when the sun is still below the horizon. And it just gradually becomes the golden hour when the sun is still above the horizon at a low angle. So that can be in the morning or in the evening. In the morning after the blue hour, in the evening before the blue hour. So that I had to write it down because I always mix it up when I tell about it. And then the warm lights, yellowish, like incandescent lights, candles, fire. So that's that. And I'm supposed to be showing you some examples of writing with light. And I hope you like it. So this was a theater production at Piccolo Teatro, Milan. It's actually a Scottish company that was performing with for Piccolo Teatro with a European something Erasmus grant or something like that. And it's during rehearsals when just the light technician was still trying to figure out how he was going to set the lights, and there's her shadow, her very own Peter Pan shadow. I'm not sure if you see it, I still see it, so it must be true. And following are a few of the theater images, also a strong light shining on the actress and creating this strong shadow and just giving her even more importance in her stance. This is a backlight with a little reflection from whatever was lying on the ground back there in those skirts. The actress here is receiving some reflection from the background because this is actually like a Madonnina they're carrying. It's supposed to be a procession, a religious procession. And so the cloth of the Madonnina is actually very light blue. And the reflection of the light is showing her face. But here also, I did not go with any white balance correction because the light technician has his reason to use certain lights for the play and not just neutral light. It conveys a mood, it conveys an atmosphere. So who am I to disturb that? And it just wouldn't look right. I have an example later on to show you if I were to do a white balance correction versus leaving it as the light technician did it. And here is a mix of light. The strong light emphasizing her speaking right now, taking the floor, telling a story, in contrast to the rest of the actresses continuing doing what they were doing before, having their picnic, just on a warm sunny day. It's a very somber mood, not somber mood, it's just comfy, it's a summer evening. But she is starting to tell the story that is not so nice. It's about Scottish immigrants Italian immigrants to Scotland, called A Bench on the Road. Here is a strong directional light from the front, but it's also narrow, which allows the background to really fall off. She still gets some light, but the background fell totally off. I did not do anything about it. One thing I did have to do in the theater, though, was underexpose drastically to what my meter was saying. And using the spot meter would not work. It would just take too much time to spot meter AE lock and go change my frame. So I really had to go manual and say, okay, this is approximately what I need. I can do exposure compensation, quickly dial it in. I already knew I had to go underexpose for, I think, 2 values. And at times I went even further down with the exposure compensation. So that was one of the ways I could really capture that. Otherwise these faces would have been blown out. Then here, I, again, underexposed, but it really was only one light source in the back here, shining on her. And believe it or not, this is a color shot. This is not a black and white conversion. The floor is a weird felt black something. And this was an adaptation of a Shakespeare play, Merry Wives of Windsor. And she is playing the flute at Windsor's, Shakespeare's gravesite. And this is actually a photo of him, but here it just looks like a gravestone. And the floor is actually getting a texture resembling grass. So it really kind of gives this feeling of being on a cemetery. And then just the rim light on the musician. And there she walks away, back towards more light, away from his graveside. And there you can see the light source. It's the same light source that was used in the other picture. Here, another example of a very strong side light. And also in studio photography, you place a strong light, maybe with the softbox, because you kind of want it to light to fall off here. But you set it high so that these lights are strong and the rest falls back. And the light is really just to my right, not behind me or anything, is to my right, 45-degree angle to me. Here, this was really, really cool because the technician used only one very narrow light strip to light the actress here. So I was standing on her side, the light is coming from there, it's going down this way, and just really illuminating her face, just this part. And this is the fall off of the light. That was pretty spectacular, and I was very fortunate to be able to be around during rehearsals, and especially during the dress rehearsal where everything needs to fall in place before the first performance, before opening night. So it's basically a regular play, but I get to run around. And of course, no flash. Absolutely no flash. You just have to amp up the ice. This is almost like a John Wright painting where the light source is from within. And at this time, the play becomes pretty dark and kind of morbid. And this is hell. These women go through hell. And that's this orange-red color that's emanating from the piano. And I was really working hard on getting the light right, the color of the light that the technician was using. No color correction whatsoever, just making it work. Here, this is a pretty neutral light, also coming from up, sideways, down, from high up. Piccolo Teatro is very, very high. If anybody has ever been to the Shakespeare's, to the Globe in England, it's built the same way. It's got this round with these tiers, and the actors are, the stage is on the same level as the first few rows for the spectators. And it's pretty awesome. Here, he gets on his corpus, and some in his face is just reflection of light from the drum. And here we go. Go back. So this is the light he used. This is a fight scene. They're coming out fighting, and it's this magenta kind of threatening light that he used, and I like it. But this is what it would look like color corrected. I think it really loses a lot of its appeal when color correcting. And I find that a lot when I'm shooting ambient. It's okay to have a yellowish warm hue to your images. Just use it wisely. Know why you're using it. Learn to read the light, where it's coming from, what it does. Look at old paintings. The old masters are fabulous guides to light. And read and reverse engineer where their lighting is coming from. The image of the piano is a prime example of John Wright, 18th century painter, who always has the light coming from within the image, always coming up like this. So it's kind of only discovered later, but I think always up. And now we're changing over to Chibian Metale in Milano. It's cemetery, which is known for enormous statues and artwork, sculptures. It's fantastic. You can spend days there. It's mind-blowing. So there was on a bright, very, very hot summer day. This is an example of shade. Shaded. It's not warm. It's kind of cold and neutral. But it's still directional. It's coming from, it's still frontal, because behind me were the trees, and you can see the shadow of the tree here, and then here is the child. This couple is grieving in the light, and just kind of going up and away. Very sad, but at the same time, the light elevates it. There's still hope in it. This is another one of those statues. It's an angel, and it's sitting in one of the open hallways. It's close to an opening, so it's getting a lot of indirect frontal light, which also makes it very soft. It's in portrait photography, in studio, you would use a ring light for that, a ring flash. Or possibly you use just the softbox pretty close to your subject's face. And this is one of my favorites. It's a stone head on Art Nouveau, one of the buildings in Milan, and it's catching some side light, and the side light gives her life. And just is reading the light, and don't be afraid to under or overexpose. If you see something, especially try to look squinting your eyes. That to me is often what gets me to find the lines that really matter in an image, and I can easily go over underexpose for it, for what I see. And here, barely anything, any detail left in this silhouette, and just backlight, strong daylight coming from outside. Same thing here. These are standing out a little bit more, so they're catching more of the direct sunlight. The sun had gone down by then and really came into the archways. And that's why you can tell here the heads, it kind of takes, it's like a fog. The light acts almost like fog and creeps into the image, but also just enough here to see expressions and gestures to read the image, to start thinking about what's happening. What is it? Is this grief? Yeah, I'm in the cemetery. This I thought was really wicked, because the strong light coming from, like, it was outside coming in from about here, and all the dust and dirt that had accumulated on these statues just changed everything. If they had been monochrome, just all clean and white, it would not have looked this good. So read the light and try to see what it does with your subject, or in this case, object. This is almost perfect portrait lighting for a nude shot, or what's it called? Boudoir. You have the light source coming from the top down, and I made sure to underexpose once again because I wanted to get the texture.
Is that a street lamp or is that sunlight?
That's sunlight. That's all sunlight. At the cemetery, it's all sunlight. Whether in the shade or coming from different directions, but it's all natural light. There's no flash used at all. In portrait photography, when you shoot people, you don't really want to underexpose like I did here, because you don't want the pores and the little wrinkles and everything to show. You want it nice, satiny, soft, and not this rough. And that's, I mean, it depends on what you do. If you want to do an athlete, it can be really cool to do that and show the veins that come out. It can be a really great effect. And here, just like a standard portrait, you know, you have the light coming from up here, and you just shoot him just casually sitting there looking out at the cemetery. This, I overexposed a great deal to get more out of this shadow. You can tell there's a strong light coming from there, but the statue is an alabaster statue, and I hope you can tell that it is, because the luminescence of this material was striking, and then with this motive, and the sculptor is just, they're such artists. It's so inspiring and fun to go look at. And there we go with a light model using studio lights, and it is up there from her. She's sitting like this, and it's just one softbox. And down here, I used just a white reflector so that there are no strong shadows in her face and that her pores don't show too much. Her skin has pretty big pores, and that's not very flattering when you do a shot like that. So the light can eliminate that. Same here, then of course, you can tell I use a little bit of Gaussian filter to soften it some more. And the light, once again, one single light source from up here, and a reflector over here on this side. And this also, this is basically how you shoot any headshot, or used to be able to shoot portrait pictures like, or passport pictures like that. Just the light source there, have another lower light here on this side to have it fairly evenly lit, but still have it fall off a little bit to give the face structure. This is only light coming through the window. And it was getting late in the afternoon, it was coming to be the golden hour. And she's sitting in the window. The apartment we were at had this rounded window. It was really amazing. It was massive, and then it was old lead glass and rounded, so I could really put her in the corner and get this really soft reflection of her. And it was a lot of fun. I did not use a reflector for her side or anything. I chose to underexpose once again to really bring out her reflection. And I'd rather have all of this fall into darkness than lose the expression in her reflection. And again, I don't use the spot meter. I usually I barely use the spot and surround, whatever. I usually just go with ambient metering, and 30 years of photography, you kind of know when you need to under or overexpose. You kind of know, you look at your readings of your meter and you say, yeah, no. Because if I did look at that, everything would just be, there were no highlights, no low lights, and that gets boring. Another shot here, light from the back, but they are getting indirect light from they're just going through an entrance, and Milan has these big, massive entrances. And I had to overexpose the back in order to get my main protagonists exposed properly. Once again, exposure compensation. I think when you're working with light, exposure compensation is your best friend. Get to know it really, really well, and go experiment to figure out. This again, overexposure on the back to get her lit properly. Exposed properly, I should say, because I didn't use flash or anything.
I noticed that you don't really like flash, but if we find a way to illuminate her a bit, wouldn't that say will be enough from the
Coming up. Coming up. I often don't like flash when I'm in various situations, and I just compensate because it's faster. When I'm at an event that goes from outside, inside, shadow, light, it's usually faster without the flash. And sometimes you luck out, sometimes not so much. It varies a little, but there will be some examples of using flash, or here, for example, my bride. She's by the window, bright sunny day in DC, and if I had just shot her without the flash, she would have been way too dark. It just wouldn't have done anything. She wouldn't have, her pose just wouldn't have given anything if she was in the shade. Unlike this shot. So there we just had a large reflector in the back, giving a little bit more light to her dress, and just having the outside almost correctly exposed, just to get more of her silhouette and the lightness of her veil. Here another example of, and it's a really, really crappy shot, so I'm just using this shot as an example. Don't, please, because this is really like, is she going to take a shower or what? So when you look at composure or composition, try to avoid these things. Or when you work on it, just try to do a cut or Photoshop it out, because it really looks like she's standing under the shower. But this is just for exercise or for showing something. So here I am standing inside, shooting them against the sky, against the outside. It was open, so no window. And here I just changed my position. And that's why I was saying it's often just too much hassle, and when you're in a situation like this, the flash sometimes just doesn't really cut it. So what you do is move around.
Okay.
So because these two are actually standing in the same spot they were standing before. I just changed to shoot from outside in, and my camera read properly, and I got them exposed properly. And no more shower. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Why did I do that? There. That was that. And then here, yes, Ken and G.I. Joe are finally married. They tied the knot in Fort Lauderdale in 2015? No, 2014. So they are coming up on their 4-year anniversary. Beach, lots of light, bright light coming from thereabouts mostly, but also reflected on the sand and everything. So that's all grossly overexposed to show their jewelry. And here, that's their engagement announcement. Here we have the light coming from over my right shoulder onto them, and how they're turned towards me gives really great light to their faces and makes them look almost human. Almost. Yeah. So, I'm not sure how Bobby feels, but oh well. Their wedding. Again, the light behind my right shoulder, and no flash or anything. And I really like how their shadows darken this path towards where they're having their nuptials. And yes, I was laying in the sun, in the sand for hours. And, well, Julie, here I used the flash.
Yeah.
Can you tell?
Yeah.
Right. The guests in the background are getting some light of the flash as well, but I tried to direct it indirect, so I shot against my reflector, against one camera, against the reflector to make sure that they're not too dark. I had to have them stand out, and I had to have a proper aperture. You can imagine with those sets, you have a very narrow depth of field. You got to be very careful playing with that. And golden hour, there it is in Key West, Florida. The sun is setting right behind the sailboat, and I did not care that I have no texture in this boat anymore. The water, of course, because it's moving, always reflects light, ambient light, and whatever. But the boat, no more texture in it. It's perfectly fine, like as a silhouette. And this is the blue hour. And that's more Bay in California. It's more rock, where their lighting is coming from. Like the image of the piano is a prime example of John Wright, 18th century painter, who always has the light coming from within the image, always coming up like this. So it's kind of cool. Only discovered later, but hey, always sounds good. And now we're changing over to Cimitero Monumentale in Milano. It's cemetery which is known for enormous statues and artwork, sculptures. It's fantastic. You can spend days there. It's mind-blowing. So there was on a bright, very, very hot summer day, this is an example of shaded light. It's not warm light. It's kind of cold neutral, but it's still directional. It's coming from, it's still frontal, because behind me were the trees, and you can see the shadow of the tree here, and then here is the child. This couple is grieving in the light and just kind of going up and away. Very sad, but at the same time, the light elevates it. There's still hope in it. This is another one of those statues. It's an angel, and it's it's in one of the open hallways. It's close to an opening, so it's getting a lot of indirect frontal light, which also makes it very soft. It's in portrait photography, in studio, you would use a ring light for that, a ring flash. Or possibly you use just the softbox pretty close to your subject's face. And this is one of my favorites. It's a stone head on Art Nouveau, one of the buildings in Milan, and it's catching some side light, and the side light gives her life. And just is reading the light, and don't be afraid to under or overexpose. If you see something, especially try to look squinting your eyes. That to me is often what gets me to find the lines that really matter in an image, and I can easily go over or underexpose for it, for what I see. And here, barely anything, any detail left in this silhouette, and just backlight, strong daylight coming from outside. Same thing here, these are standing out a little bit more, so they're catching more of the direct sunlight. The sun had gone down by then and really came into the archways. And that's why you can tell here the heads, it kind of takes, it's like a fog. The light acts almost like fog and creeps into the image, but also just enough here to see expressions and gestures to read the image, to start thinking about what's happening. What is it? Is this grief? Well, yeah, I'm in the cemetery. This I thought was really wicked because the strong light coming from, like, it was outside coming in from about here, and all the dust and dirt that had accumulated on these statues just changed everything. If they had been monochrome, just all clean and white, it would not have looked this good. So read the light and try to see what it does with your subject, or in this case, object. This is almost perfect portrait lighting for a nude shot, or what's it called? Boudoir. You have the light source coming from the top down, and I made sure to underexpose once again because I wanted to get the texture.
Is that a street lamp or is that sunlight?
That's sunlight. That's all sunlight. At the cemetery, it's all sunlight. Whether in the shade or coming from different directions, but it's all natural light. There's no flash used at all. In portrait photography, when you shoot people, you don't really want to underexpose like I did here, because you don't want the pores and the little wrinkles and everything to show. You want it nice, satiny, soft, and not this rough. And that's, I mean, it depends on what you do. If you want to do an athlete, it can be really cool to do that and show the veins that come out. It can be a really great effect. And here, just like a standard portrait, you know, you have the light coming from up here, and you could just shoot him just casually sitting there looking out at the cemetery. This, I overexposed a great deal to get more out of this shadow. You can tell there's a strong light coming from there, but the statue is an alabaster statue, and I hope you can tell that it is, because the luminescence of this material was striking, and then with this motive, and the sculptor is just, they're such artists. It's so inspiring and fun to go look at. And there we go with a light model using studio lights, and it is up there from her. She's sitting like this, and it's just one softbox. And down here, I used just a white reflector so that there are no strong shadows in her face and that her pores don't show too much. Her skin has pretty big pores, and that's not very flattering when you do a shot like that. So the light can eliminate that. Same here, then of course, you can tell I use a little bit of Gaussian filter to soften it some more. And the light, once again, one single light source from up here and a reflector over here on this side. And this is basically how you shoot any headshot, or used to be able to shoot portrait pictures like, or passport pictures like that. And just the light source there, have another lower light here on this side to have it fairly evenly lit, but still have it fall off a little bit to give the face structure. This is only light coming through the window. And it was getting late in the afternoon, that it was coming to be the golden hour. And she's sitting in the window. The apartment we were at had this rounded window. It was really amazing. It was massive, and then it was old lead glass and rounded, so I could really put her in the corner and get this really soft reflection of her. And it was a lot of fun. I did not use a reflector for her side or anything. I chose to underexpose once again to really bring out her reflection. And I'd rather have all of this fall into darkness than lose the expression in her reflection. And again, I don't use the spot meter. I barely use the spot and surround, whatever. I usually just go with ambient metering, and 30 years of photography, you kind of know when you need to under or overexpose. You kind of know, you look at your readings of your meter and you say, yeah, no. Because if I did look at that, everything would just be, there were no highlights, no lowlights, and that gets boring. Another shot here, light from the back, but they are getting indirect light from they're just going through an entrance, and Milan has these big, massive entrances. And I had to overexpose the back in order to get my main protagonists exposed properly. Once again, exposure compensation. I think when you're working with light, exposure compensation is your best friend. Get to know it really, really well, and go experiment to figure out. This again, overexposure on the back to get her lit properly. Exposed properly, I should say, because I didn't use flash or anything.
I noticed that you don't really like flash, but if we find a way to illuminate her a bit, wouldn't that say will be enough?
Coming up. I often don't like flash when I'm in various situations, and I just compensate because it's faster. When I'm at an event that goes from outside, inside, shadow, light, it's usually faster without the flash. And sometimes you luck out, sometimes not so much. It varies a little, but there will be some examples of using flash, or here, for example, my bride. She's by the window, bright sunny day in DC, and if I had just shot her without the flash, she would have been way too dark. It just wouldn't have done anything. She wouldn't have, her pose just wouldn't have given anything if she was in the shade. Unlike this shot. So there we just had a large reflector in the back, giving a little bit more light to her dress, and just having the outside almost correctly exposed, just to get more of her silhouette and the lightness of her veil. Here another example of, and it's a really, really crappy shot, so I'm just using this shot as an example. Don't, please, because this is really like, is she going to take a shower or what? So when you look at composure or composition, try to avoid these these things. Or when you work on it, just try to do a cut or Photoshop it out because it really looks like she's standing under the shower. But this is just for exercise, or for showing something. So here I am standing inside, shooting them against the sky, against the outside. It was open, so no window. And here I just changed my position. And that's why I was saying it's often just too much hassle, and when you're in a situation like this, the flash sometimes just doesn't really cut it. So what you do is move around.
Okay.
So because these two are actually standing in the same spot they were standing before. I just changed to shoot from outside in, and my camera read properly, and I got them exposed properly. And no more shower. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Why did I do that? There. That was that. And then here, yes, Ken and G.I. Joe are finally married. They tied the knot in Fort Lauderdale in 2015? No, 2014. So they are coming up on their 4-year anniversary. Beach, lots of light, bright light coming from their abouts mostly, but also reflected on the sand and everything. So that's all grossly overexposed to show their joy. And here, that's their engagement announcement. Here we have the light coming from over my right shoulder onto them, and how they're turned towards me gives really great light to their faces and makes them look almost human. Almost. But, yeah. So, I'm not sure how Bobby feels, but oh well. Their wedding, again, the light behind my right shoulder, and no flash or anything. And I really like how their shadows darken this path towards where they're having their nuptials. And yes, I was laying in the sun, in the sand for hours. And, well, Jubilee, here I used the flash.
Yeah.
Can you tell?
Yeah.
Right. The guests in the background are getting some light of the flash as well, but I tried to direct it indirect, so I shot against my reflector, against one camera, against the reflector to make sure that they're not too dark. I had to have them stand out, and I had to have a proper aperture. You can imagine with those sets, you have a very narrow depth of field. You got to be very careful playing with that. And golden hour, there it is in Key West, Florida. The sun is setting right behind the sailboat, and I did not care that I have no texture in this boat anymore. The water, of course, because it's moving, always reflects light, ambient light, and whatever. But the boat, no more texture in it. It's perfectly fine, like as a silhouette. And this is the blue hour. And that's Morro Bay in California. That's Morro Rock. We're on vacation, and I got up really early. I don't know why. Or maybe I was still up. That could be it too. And it's really before the sun comes up from the horizon. And it was cold because it was in fall. Yes, it gets cold in California as well. And it was wet. You can tell by all the reflections here. And the mist was starting to lift. You can see the top of Morro Rock is not yet entirely visible. For an example of blue hour. Just wanted to show that. And New York, skyline shot from Lower Manhattan, from across the Hudson, from New Jersey. No white balance correction, again, because I wanted to capture the hues coming from all the different light sources that New York by night has to offer. just what, 2 weekends ago, Light Festival, shitty weather. Man, it was cold, it was wet, and it was just cloudy. But sometimes a ray of light came through, and then it was a light festival. So you had things illuminated, and with the gray skies, sometimes colors just started to pop. And that just hit with a little bit of light. The colors pop, saturate them, and it can be pretty cool. I haven't come across that here in Brussels yet, so it's been too great. And here again, just the sun was there, but there was an opening in the clouds over here, letting light come down here, and here everything dark, kind of dropping off the hull of the ship at the tip, dropping that off into darkness. But here also, the colors were saturated really nicely because of just that bit of light coming through. The evil eye, also underexposed to my meter readings, and those were shot with my brand new camera, so I was still fumbling, trying to figure out what button is where and what not. It's really weird coming from Mark II, Canon Mark II, going to a small XT2. It's texture and dexterity and where the buttons are, so I think it came out okay. And I think, let's see, yeah. A still life, natural light, ambient light. I'm in a room, and I have the light coming from behind me. It's just this little light, because it was a small window in this big dark room that was just perfectly sending some light to my arrangement there. Well, I arranged it when I saw the light coming in. Well, here we have our friends partying hard after their wedding, and here I used a strobe, a nozzle strobe, to make sure that I really mostly get my guys here and not so much the surrounding, because I want to have that ambient color, the warm glow of my Christmas lights over a sheer curtain. That's what was used. So just to make sure I had some colored Christmas tree lights and some white ones, which of course, because of what they are, turn out yellow in photography. You don't do a white balance correction. And using the flash, it overrides the ambient light hue. And I only wanted that for my guys here, so that's why I used the nozzle on the strobe. This was a shot at a bar in Frankfurt. I was promised some really great cocktails, and who says no to that? But it was super dark. I mean, talking about a dark lounge cocktail bar. It was incredibly dark, and even at 64 ISO, 6400 ISO, it was still too dark. And I had the 24-1.5 on my lens that has like a 4. Just wasn't cutting it, but well, one has.
Sorry, what's the shutter speed here?
The shutter speed on that was, I think it was 130, and aperture 4. And friends just helped out my husband and the mixologist's father, who's a friend of ours. They helped me out bringing some light via the flashlight app on their phones. And it worked great. It just gave me enough extra light to get these shots. And surprisingly, it's pretty neutral light. You can see the ice in the glass is really white, and the orange is a natural orange color, not oversaturated orange or anything. And yet still his really white shirt, it was really clean and white, I swear. Still falls into the light of the ambience, so a little bit dimmer and yellowish, which I think in contrast to the picture here works really well. So I wouldn't change that at all. Here again, cell phone, flash apps. Use them if you have the chance. It works. It helps out a great deal. These are just fun to tell you about that. Really fun evening drinking. Here I did that was an experiment. A night shot of the cathedral in Palermo. And it actually has kind of a yellowish tint, but I used one of the automatic white balance settings, and I think I used the fluorescent light, which is not the right setting for it, but I did that on purpose because I did want it cold because I have my issues. So that was just the right thing for me to have this cold. Besides, it was cold and stormy. It was in January. January in Sicily is not advisable. It's cold and windy and wet. That's another shot, night shot. Here I'm using my flash, and it's like, you know, it's, the colors are neutral and everything is, but it leaves me cold. Just, and here, and this is basically the raw shot, not color corrected, not exposure corrected in Photoshop, nothing done. That's what it pretty much looked like, and I like it much better. This is also not color corrected. It's a small alley in a village in Piedmont. Not sure if you know Volpedo. Volpedo?
Volpedo, yes.
You should know Volpedo because of Calizza. And it's just so dreamy, and it reminded me of what, I'm not sure, I think of maybe an old Dutch painting or something, but I just loved it. It was the middle of the night, and I tried color correcting it, because I wasn't going to run around with the gray card and do color correction or anything while I'm walking around the village at night. That wasn't happening. But trying to color correct it in Photoshop later was just not working. So I just left it as it was, and I'm kind of liking it. And here we go, real estate photography. Woohoo! Everything neutral. Although when I do real estate photography, I always turn on all the lights, because the lights that are in a room are in a room for a reason. Where people place their lights is important, because, and I just learned that the other day, in Danish it's called hygge. Are you Danish? You know hygge?
No, but
Okay, and it's placing lights to create warmth, to create a good atmosphere while you're dealing with the dread of winter. So that's one thing. It's a very important design aspect where you put the lights. I mean, even here, it's important where people put the lights for different purposes. So here I did have the flash on my camera, and I shot behind me against the ceiling so that I would get this properly lit. I needed to have a 1/125th synchro time in order to really get the outside. It was a bright sunny day in Rapallo, in South Italy, near Genova, and I needed to create a balance between the inside and the out, and just using the lights provided in the room would not have been enough. It would look really dreary, and it is a summer like vacation home. This is not in Rapallo, this is in South Florida, just a beach shack. Again, using some flash, HDR, of course, because otherwise on a bright sunny day in Florida, you cannot shoot indoor without using HDR. And I did not color correct this part because here the change in color temperature of the light gives it depth. If I had color corrected that to proper white, the whole image would have looked really flat right there. I would not have given it depth. You wouldn't see that it goes deeper into the room. Here, I just love what this light fixture does to the walls and the ceiling. I just totally fell in love with that. Underexposed. This is no white balance treatment. And it still gives it more warmth, having just the natural occurrence of the light temperature on the film. I prefer it, others may prefer the color corrected version here. And once again, I did not use flash because ambient light helps tell stories. And this is an old, probably about 200-year-old lead glass ceiling light. A similar light, this one is bigger, it's in the entrance and shot from straight underneath and only color corrected for the light itself, not for the ambience. And what happened is that this is actually, it's not stark white, it's yellowed, it's old, it's 200 years old, so what do you expect? And the ceiling is kind of like a pale pink, naturally, but I had to also underexpose greatly in order to get the texture and the light. And what's more important, and that's what you need to ask yourself every time when you're dealing with light, what's more important to you? The ceiling color and the molding here, or the texture and the light and the color that comes from it? And that's a decision you need to make. That's where your creativity comes in. And this is just kind of on the verge to blue hour, but still golden hour. It's a really weird mix there towards sunset, and just the light is behind this building here, catching in the lantern and creating this leading line on the top of the wall and this triangle here. And just making it pretty. I just like it because of the lines. I don't know. Can't really say much about it other than I love how the light is creating these lines. No deeper meaning. It's just a corner in Volcano that I love. That's all. And I think that's it. Yes. Done. If you have any questions, we have to ask. And I hope you so, questions? Anyone? Don't apologize, no.
What was the biggest game changer for you with using lights? What was something that when you started doing or using, you thought, okay, this makes a huge difference in my photography and it really advances in me as a photographer?
Using lights?
Yeah.
What kind of lights? Are you talking about artificial lights? Or I think the biggest game changer for me was when I mastered HDR photography. That was really one of the biggest game changers for me. Because I was able to create a business out of it. I mean, all artists have to live from something, and we have to pay our gear and whatnot. And I was able to create what I wanted to create exactly using HDR. That was the biggest game changer, I think. Yeah.
But that was applied into real estate.
It was I've done HDR in real estate, but I also do it at times for other things like urban architectural photography, or I don't have, somewhere in my list of pictures I have examples, but I don't know where. take long to find. But I've also used it in just plain nature landscape photography, HDR, especially up in the mountains when we were snowshoeing. It was pretty cool because the lights were just so extreme, and the reflection of the sunlight on the snow really made it necessary. If I wanted to have some kind of texture in the forest that was somewhere in the valley in the image, if I wanted to have some kind of texture in that, I needed to bring down the exposure to not blow out the snow. And that was I was only able to do that really with HDR photography because the contrast, or the dynamic range, no camera can handle that. It was too much. But also, it works. It was also in Venice. I've used it in Venice with the canals. It worked really well. But careful, careful, careful with HDR. There is a lot of times I see ghosting, which is when things are moving and you see the blurred lines, and that's not the song. So it's not really cool. And the other thing is when people start using HDR, me included, there's this weird grayish, blackish effect on some areas where the light's been taken out too much, the saturation has been taken out too much, and it just looks very bizarre. And you want it to look natural, our eyes really compensate for a lot of things that a camera cannot compensate for under normal circumstances, so you either use flash or HDR photography, and you're starting to dabble with it. Man, careful, because it can quickly look like a comic strip. I've done it too. I've been there. I've gone through the process. I've used. It's painful. It takes a long time till you really have the formula out for yourself for how you shoot and where you see the light, and then translate that. Because there's no set formula. If you use the presets, you may get close to what you want, but you still have to make adjustments, and then you have to be careful not to over-adjust, because then another area just goes bad. Anything else? No?
So thank you very much, Trish.